So I just finished Only Dull People Are Brilliant at Breakfast. Knew nothing about the book. I bought it the other day, Oscar Wilde, and I wanted to do this challenge. Could I read the entire book in an English accent, and could I stay consistent with it? And I think I stayed pretty much 98% consistent with the accent throughout, which surprises me. I thought I'd be a bit more self-conscious at certain parts or certain words, but I think I was kind of fine throughout the whole thing, which was interesting. The start of the book took me a while to warm up because I'm dyslexic. Sometimes certain words I can't sound words out that well, but I think bourgeois, class, I think that was bourgeois. That's the word. So I messed up that word a few times, which is kind of embarrassing, but I think I should post that because it's kind of funny. I found it very insightful to read that all at one go. So that's just paragraphs and sentences of little insights into human behavior and into the self, which was very insightful. And some of the sentences I've heard before from Oscar Wilde, and some of the things I've thought before, but I haven't had the language to, or I haven't articulated those ideas. So it's always good to do, but it's always good to do in an English accent, because I think in doing it with the English accent, I had a different perspective on the ideas. I think when you do an accent, it slightly changes your personality a little bit. It gives you a different lens in which to look at the word. But I definitely had a couple of insights while reading that, and hopefully this was an enjoyable video for you to watch. I'm sure a lot of people didn't watch it the whole way through, but anyways, I'll be doing a new challenge soon enough. I think I might try doing an American accent, a short book again. That was 50 pages. Pretty simple to read. Okay, I'll see you later. Thank you. To know nothing about their great men is one of the necessary elements of English education. We spend our days, each one of us, in looking for the secret of life. Well, the secret of life is in art. The supreme object of life is to live. Few people live. It is true life only to realize one's own perfection, to make one's every dream a reality. To me, the life of a businessman who eats his breakfast early in the morning, catches the train for the city, stays there in the dingy, dusty atmosphere of the commercial world, and goes back to his house in the evening, and after supper to sleep, is worse than the life of the galley slave. His chains are golden instead of iron. Bad art is a great deal worse than no art at all. Nothing is worth doing except what the world says is impossible. To make a good salad is to be brilliant at diplomatized. The problem is entirely the same in both cases. To know exactly how much oil one must put what one's vinegar, life is much too important a thing ever to talk seriously about it. There is always more brass than brains in the aristocracy. Good kings are the only dangerous enemies that modern democracy has. I have always been of the opinion that consistency is the last refuge of the unimaginative. The British cook is a foolish woman who should be turned for her inequities into a pillar of that sort which she never knows how to use. Of Shakespeare, it may be said he was the first to see the dramatic value of doublets, and that a climax may depend on the crinoline. The stage is not merely the meeting place of all the arts, but is also the return of art to life. The true dramatist shows us life under the conditions of art, not art in form of life. Our ordinary English novelists fail in the concentration of style. Their characters are far too eloquent and talk themselves to tatters. What we want is a little more reality and a little less rhetoric. We wish that they would talk less and think more. They lead us through a barren desert of verbiage to a mirage that they call life. We wander aimlessly through a very wilderness of words in search of one touch of nature. However, one should not be too severe on English novels. They are only a relaxation of the intellectually unemployed. A poet can survive everything but a misprint. A poet without hysterics is rare. There is no such thing as a stupid American. Many Americans are horrid, vulgar, intrusive, and impertinent, just as many English people are also. But stupidity is not one of the national vices. Indeed, in America, there is no opening for a fool. They accept brains even from boot black and get them. As for marriage, it is one of their most popular institutions. The American man marries early and the American woman marries often, and they get on extremely well together. America has never quite forgiven Europe for having been discovered somewhat earlier in the history than itself. It would be a very good idea and thing if people were taught how to speak. Language is the noblest instrument we have, either for the revealing of the concealing of thought. Talk itself is a sort of spiritualized action, and conversation is one of the loveliest of the arts. The only form of fiction in which real characters do not seem out of place is history. Early in life, she had discovered the important truth that nothing looks so like innocence as indiscretion, and by a series of reckless escapades, half of them quite harmless, she had acquired all the privileges of the personality. She had more than once changed her husband. Indeed, de Brit credits her with 3 marriages, but as she had never changed with her lover, the world had long ago ceased to talk scandal about her. Unless one is wealthy, there is no use in being charming fellow. Romance is the privilege of the rich, not the profession of the unemployed. The poor should be practical and prosaic. It is better to have a permanent income than to be fascinating. Nobody, even in the provinces, should be allowed to ask an intelligent question about pure mathematics across a dinner table. A question of this kind is quite as bad as inquiring suddenly about the state of a man's soul. But what is a good friendship if one cannot say exactly what one means? Anybody can say charming things and try to please and to flatter, but a true friend always says unpleasant things and does not mind giving pain. Indeed, if he is really true friend, he prefers it, for he knows that then he is doing good. The only thing that sustains one through life is the consciousness of the immense inferiority of everybody else, and this is a feeling that I have always cultivated. I am so clever that sometimes I don't understand a single word of what I'm saying. I have always been of the opinion that hard work is simply the refuge of people who have nothing whatever to do. All that is known by the term fin de siècle, I particularly admire and love. It is the fine flower of civilization, the only thing that keeps the world from the commonplace, the coarse, the barbarous. Flaubert did not write French prose, but the prose of a great artist who happened to be French. I was thinking in bed this morning that the great superiority of France over England is that France, every Burgos wants to be an artist, whereas in England every artist wants to be a Burgos. Prayer must never be answered. If it is, it ceases to be prayer and becomes correspondence. I have made an important discovery that alcohol taken in sufficient quantities produces all effects of intoxication. Missionaries, my dear, don't you realize that missionaries are the divinely provided food of the destitute and the underfed cannibals, wherever they are on the brink of starvation? Heaven, in its infinite mercy, sends them a nice plum missionary. Philosophy teaches us to bear with the the misfortunes of others. My own experience is that the more we study art, the less we care for nature. Art is our spirited protest of gallant attempt to teach nature her proper place. Thinking is the most unhealthy thing in the world, and people die of it just as they die of any other disease. Fortunately, in England, at any rate, thought is not catching. In literature, we require distinction, charm, beauty, and imaginative power. We don't want to be harrowed and disgusted with an account of doings of lower orders. I quite admit the modern novel have many points. All I insist on is that, as a class, they're quite unreadable. Art itself is really a form of exaggeration and selection, which is the very spirit of art, is nothing more than an intensified mode of overemphasis. Facts are not merely finding a footing place in history, but they are usurping and domain of fancy and have invaded the kingdom of romance. Their chilling touch is over everything. They are vulgarizing mankind. Society sooner or later must return to its lost leader, the cultured and fascinating liar. Life imitates art far more than art imitates life. Life holds the mirror up to art and either reproduces some strange type of imagined painter or sculptor, or realizes in fact that has been dreamed in fiction. Imitation can be made the sincerest form of imitation can be made the sincerest form of insult. Yesterday evening, Miss Arundel insisted on going to the window and looking at the glorious sky, as she called it. Of course, I had to look at it. She is one of those absurdly pretty Philistines to whom one can deny nothing. And what was it? It was simply a very second-rate Turner, a Turner of bad period, with all painters' worst faults exaggerated and overemphasized. The more abstract, the more ideal an art is, the more it reveals to us the temper of its age. If we wish to understand a nation by means of art, let us look at its architecture, of its music. The fact is that we look back on the ages entirely through the medium of art, and art, very fortunately, has never once told us the truth. To become a work of art is the object of living. The English are always degrading truths in facts. When a truth becomes a fact, it loses all its intellectual value. There is a great deal to be said in favor of reading a novel backwards. The last page is a rule the most interesting, and when one begins with a catastrophe of the denouement, one feels on pleasant terms of equality with the author. It is like going behind the scenes of a theatre. One is no longer taken in, and the hairbreadth escapes of the hero, and the wild agonies of the heroine leaves one absolutely unmoved. One knows the jealousy, guarded secret, and one can afford to smile at the quite unnecessary anxiety that the puppets of fiction always consider it. Their duty is to display. All charming people, I fancy, are spoiled. It is the secret of our attraction. It is always a silly thing to give advice, but to give good advice is absolutely fatal. I hope we will never fall into that error. If you do, you will be sorry for it. You forget that a thing is not necessarily true because a man dies for it. Art, even art of the fullest scope and wildest vision, can never really show us the eternal world All that shows us is our own souls. The one world which we have and real cognizance is art, and art only that reveals us to ourselves. A critic should be thought to criticize a work of art without making any reference to the personality of the author. This is in fact the beginning of a criticism. Every great man nowadays has his disciplines, and it is always Judas who writes the biography, learned conversation, either the affection of the ignorant or the professional of the mentally unemployed. Education is admirable thing, but it is well to remember from time to time that nothing that is worth knowing can be thought. Anybody can write a 3-volume novel. It merely requires a complete ignorance of both life and literature. Anybody can make history, only a great man can write it. It is sometimes said that the tragedy of the artist's life is that he cannot realize his ideal. The true tragedy that dogs the steps of most artists is that they realize that the ideal too absolutely, for when the ideal is realized, it is robbed of its wonder and its mystery and becomes simply a new strange starting point for an ideal that is other than itself. This is the reason why music is perfect type of art. Conversation should be touch everything. The conversation should touch everything, but should concentrate itself on nothing. Life is terribly deficient in form. Its catastrophes happen in the wrong way and to the wrong people. There is a grotesque horror about its comedies, and its tragedies seem to accumulate in farce. One is always wounded when one approaches it. Things last either too long or not long enough. All the arts are immoral, except for those baser forms of sensual or didactic art that seeks to excite to action of evil or of good. For action of every kind belongs to the sphere of ethics. And the aim of art is to simply create a mood. There is no country in the world so much indeed of unpractical people as this country of ours. With us, thought is degraded by its constant association with practice. We live in an age of overworked and undereducated, the age in which people are so industrious that they become absolutely stupid. The sure way of knowing nothing about life is to try to make one's self useful. It is so easy for people to have sympathy with suffering. It is so difficult for them to have sympathy with thought. An idea that is not dangerous is unworthy of being called an idea at all. A man is least himself when he talks in his own person. Give him a mask and he will tell you the truth. For what is truth? In matters of religion, it is simply the opinion that has survived. In matters of science, it is ultimate sensation. In matters of art, it is one's last mood. There are two ways of disliking art. One is dislike it. The other, to like it rationally. A little sincerity is a dangerous thing, and a great deal of it is absolutely fatal. Those who find ugly meanings in beautiful things are corrupt. Without being charming, this is a fool. Those who find beautiful meanings in beautiful things are cultivated. For these there is hope. There is no such thing as moral or immoral books. Books are well written or badly written. That is all. Vice and virtue are to the artist materials of an art. All art is at once surface and symbol. Those who go beneath the surface do so at their own peril. Those who read the symbol do so at their own peril. It is spectator and not life that art really mirrors. When critics disagree, the artist is in accord with himself. We can forgive a man for making a useful thing as long as he does not admire it. The only excuse for making useless things is that one admires it intensely. Experience was of no ethical value. It was merely the name men gave to their mistakes. There is always something ridiculous about the emotions of people whom one ceased to love. There is luxury in self-reproach. When we blame ourselves, we feel that no one else has the right to blame us. It is the confusion, not the priest, that gives us absolution. Is insincerity such a terrible thing? I think not. It is merely a method by which we can multiply our personalities. With the abolition of private property, then we shall have true, beautiful, healthy individualism. Nobody will waste his life in accumulating things and symbols for things. One will live. To live is the rarest thing in the world. Most people exist, that is all. There is one class in community that thinks more about money than the rich, and that is the poor. The poor can think of nothing else. That is misery of being poor. High hopes were once formed of democracy, but democracy means simply the bulge going of the people by the people for the people. The fact is that civilization requires slaves. The Greeks were quite right there. Unless there are slaves to do the ugly, horrible, uninteresting work, culture and contemplation become almost impossible. Human slavery is wrong, insecure and demoralizing. On a mechanical slavery, on the slavery of the machine, the future of the world depends. A work of art is the unique result of a unique temperament. The moment that an artist takes notice of what other people want and tries to supply and demand, he ceases to be an artist and becomes a dull or an amusing craftsman, an honest or dishonest tradesman. Now art should never try to be popular. The public should try to make itself artistic. In England, the arts that have escaped best are the arts in which the public take no interest. Poetry is an instance of what I mean. We have been able to have fine poetry in England because the public do not read it and consequently do not have influence on it. In the old days, men had the rake. Now they have the press. In England, journalism, except in a few well-known instances, not having been carried to such excesses of brutality, is still a great factor, a really remarkable power. The tyranny that it proposes to exercise over people's private lives seems to be quite extraordinary. The fact is that public have insatiable curiosity to know everything except what is worth knowing. Journalism, consciousness of this, and having tradesman-like habits supplies their demands. In centuries before ours, the public nailed the ears of the journalists to pump. That was quite hideous. In the century, journalists have nailed their own ears to the keyhole. That is much worse. Anybody can sympathize with the sufferings of a friend, but it requires a very fine nature. It requires, in fact, the nature of a true individualist to sympathize with a friend's success. Work is the curse of drinking classes of this country. Public opinion exists only where there are no ideas. A subject that is beautiful in itself gives no suggestion to be the artist. It lacks imperfection. Art is the only serious thing in the world, and the artist is the only person who never is serious. The only thing that can console one for being poor is the extravagance. The only thing that can console one for being rich is the economy. One should never listen. To listen is a sign of indifference to one's hearers. The first duty in life is to be as artificial as possible. What the second duty is, no one has yet discovered. Wickedness is the myth invented by good people to account for the curious attractiveness of others. Those who see any difference between soul and body have neither. A really well-made buttonhole is the only link between art and nature. Religions die when they are proved to be true. Science is the record of dead religions. The well-bred contradict other people. The wise contradict themselves. Nothing that actually occurs is of the smallest importance. Dullness is coming of age of seriousness. In all unimportant matters, style, not sincerity is the essential. In all important matters, style, not sincerity, is essential. If one tells the truth, one is sure, sooner or later, to be found out. Pleasure is the only thing one can live for. Nothing ages the happiness. No crime is vulgar, but all vulgarity is crime. Vulgarity is the conduct of others. Only the shallow know themselves. Time is a waste of money. One should always be a little improbable. There is fatality about all good resolutions. They are invariably made too soon. The only way to atone for being occasionally a little overdressed is by being always absolutely overeducated. Any preoccupation with ideas of what is right or wrong in conduct shows an arrested intellectual development. Ambition is the last refuge of failure. One should either be a work of art or wear a work of art. It is only the superficial qualities that last. Man's deeper nature is soon found out. Industry is the root of all ugliness. The ages live in history through the acronisms. The age live in the history through their acronisms. The old believe everything, the middle-aged suspect everything, the young know everything. The condition of the perfection is idleness. The aim of perfection is youth. Only the great masters of style ever succeed in being obscure. To love oneself is the beginning of the lifelong romance. Oh, it is indeed a burning shame that there would be one law for men and another law for women. I think that there should be no law for anybody. After the first glass, you should see things as you wish they were. After the second, you see things as they are not. Finally, you see things as they really are. And that is the most horrible thing in the world. My existence is a scandal. It often happens that real tragedies of life occur in such an articulate manner that they hurt one by their crude violence, their absolute incoherence, their absurd want for meaning, their entire lack of style. Ultimately, the bond of all companionship, whether in marriage or in friendship, is conversation. Sins of the flesh are nothing. They are melodies for physicians to cure. If they should be cured, sins of the soul are alone shameful. The aim of love is to love, no more and no less. To regret one's own experience is to arrest one's own development. To deny one's own experiences is to put a lie into lips of one's own life. It is no less than a denial of the soul. What the artist is always looking for is the mode of existence in which soul and body are one, and individuals in which the outward expressive or the inward in which form reveals. Now it seems to me that love of some kind is the only possible explanation of the extraordinary amount of suffering that there is in the world. Most people are other people. Their thoughts are someone else's opinions. Their lives are mimicry. Their passions are quotations. Every single work of art is fulfillment of a prophecy, for every work of art is a conversation of an idea into an image. All great ideas are dangerous. Art only begins where copying ends. All bad art is a result of good intentions, by nature and by choice. I am extremely insolent. I never put off till tomorrow what I can possibly do the day after. I am one of those who are made for exceptions, not for laws. Praise makes me humble, but when I am abused, I know I have touched the stars. Where will it end? Half the world does not believe in God, and the other half does not believe in me. If I were alone, marooned on some desert island, and had my things with me, I should dress for dinner every evening. I have the simplest of tastes. I am always satisfied with the best. A patriot put in the prison for loving his country loves his country, and the poet in prison for loving boys loves boys. To have altered my life would have been to admitted that Uranian love is ignoble. I hold it to be noble, and more noble than any other form. I entered prison with a heart of stone, thinking only of pleasure, but how my heart has been broken. Pity has entered my heart. I now understand that pity is the greatest and most beautiful thing that there is in the world, and that's why I can't be angry with those who condemned me, nor with anyone, because I would not have known all that. I am not a scrap ashamed of having been in prison. I am horribly ashamed of the materialism of the life that brought me there. It is quite unworthy of an artist. I love acting. It is much more real than life. As soon as people are old enough to know better, they don't know anything at all. Tragedy of the old age is not that one is old, but that one is too young. To get back my youth, I would do anything in the world except take exercise, get up early, to be respectable. Okay, so I'm on to the next side of the clip as the camera's running out. One always can be kind to people about whom one cares nothing. Self-sacrifice is a thing that should be put down by the law. It is demoralizing to people for whom one sacrifices oneself. English people are far more interested in American barbarism than they are in American civilization. Every right article of apparel belongs equally to both sexes, and there is absolutely no such thing as definitely feminine garment. It is really only the idle classes who dress badly wherever physical labor of any kind is required. The costume used is a rule absolutely right for labor necessities, freedom, and without freedom there is no such thing as beauty in a dress at all. With an evening coat and a white tie, anybody, even a stockbroker, can gain a reputation for being civilized. It is only shallow people who do not judge by appearances. Being natural is simply a pose, and most irritating pose I know. Perhaps one never seems so much at one's ease as when one has to play a part. I think a man should invent his own myth. All art is quite useless. No great artist ever sees things as they really are. If he did, he would cease to be an artist. The desire for beauty is merely a heightened form of the desire for life. Extravagance is the luxury of poor, penury the luxury of the rich. We are often told that the poor are grateful for the charity. Some of them are, no doubt, but the best amongst the poor are never grateful. They are ungrateful, discontented, disobedient, and rebellious. They are quite right to be so. To recommend thrift to the poor is both grotesque and insulting. It is advising a man who is starving to eat less. Why should the poor be grateful for the crumbs that fall from the richest man's table? They should be seated at the board and are beginning to know it. The real tragedy of poor is that they can afford nothing but self-denial. Beautiful sins, like beautiful things, are the privilege of the rich. The Grandian passion is the privilege of people who have nothing to do. That is one of the idle classes of the country. The inherited stupidity of the race, sound English common sense. Anybody can have common sense, provided they have no imagination. I love superstitions. They are the color element of the thought and imagination. They are the opponents of common sense. Nowadays, most people die of the sort of creeping common sense and discover when it is too late that the only thing one never regrets are one's mistakes. Selfishness is not living as one wishes to live. It is asking others to live as one wishes to live. Conversation is one of the loveliest of the arts. Recreation, not instruction, is the aim of conversation. The maxim, if you find the company dull, blame yourself, seems to us somewhat optimistic. In the case of meeting a genius and a duke at dinner, the good talker will try to raise himself to the level of the former and to bring the latter down to his own level. To succeed among one's social superiors, one must have no hesitation in contradicting them. A man who can dominate a London dinner table and can dominate the world. I adore them. London dinner parties. The clever people never listen, and the stupid people people never talk. It is only the intellectually lost who ever argue. To believe is very dull. To doubt is intensely engrossing. To be on the alert is to live. To be lulled into security is to die. I never approve or disapprove of anything now. It is an absurd attitude to take towards life. We are not sent into the world to air our moral prejudice. The things one feels absolutely certain about are never true. That is the fatality of fate and the lesson of romance. No man dies for what he knows to be true. Men die for what they want to be true, for what some terror in their hearts tell them is not true. Murder is always a mistake. One should never do anything that one cannot talk about at dinner. Starvation, and not sin, is the parent of modern crime. A community is infinitely more brutalized by the habitual employment of the punishment than it is by the occasional occurrence of crime. Prison life makes one see people and things that are really as they really are. That is why it turns one to a stone. It is the people outside who are deceived by the illusion of life in constant motion. To those who are in prison, tears are a part of every day's experience. A day in a prison on which one does not weep is a day on which one's heart is hard, not a day on which one's heart is happy. The most terrible thing about it is imprisonment is not that it breaks one's heart. Hearts are made to be broken, but that it turns one's heart to stone. It is exactly because a man cannot do a thing that he is proper judge of it. The one advantage of playing with fire is that one never even gets a singed. It is the people who don't know how to play with it who get burned. What is a cynic? A man who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. The sentimentalist is always a cynic at heart. Indeed, sentimentality is merely the bank of holiday of a cynicism. A sentimentalist is simply a man who desires to have the luxury of an emotion without paying for it. He is the typical Englishman, always dull, usually violent, like all people who try to exhaust the subject. He exhausted his listeners. She believes as if she was beautiful. Most American women do. It is the secret of their charm. She tried to look picturesque, but only succeeded in being untidy. She talks more and says less than anybody I ever met. She is made to be a public speaker, a dowdy, dull girl with one of those characteristics, British faces that, once seen, are never remembered. Discontent is the first step in progress of a man or a nation. Disobedience, in the eyes of anyone who has read history, is a man of original virtue. It is through disobedience that progress has been made. Through disobedience and through rebellion, in art as politics, there is one origin for all revolutions, a desire on the part of a man, a nobler form of life, for a freer method and an opportunity of expression. It is the first duty of a gentleman to dream. A dreamer is one who can only find the way by moonlight, and his punishment is that he sees the dawn before the rest of the world. Society often forgives the criminal, it never forgives the dreamer. The one person who has more illusions than the dreamer is the man of the action. My duty to myself is to amuse myself terrifically. People never think of cultivating a young girl's imagination. It is the great defect of the modern education. We teach people how to remember. We never teach them how to grow. In the summer term of Oxford teaches the exquisite art of idleness, one of the most important things that any university can teach. The secret of life is never to have an emotion that is unbecoming. It is only the shallow people who require years to get rid of an emotion. A man who can master himself can end a sorrow as easily as he can invent a pleasure. Beer, the Bible, and 7 deadly virtues have made England what it is. The English public always feels perfectly at ease when mediocrity is talking to it. A family is terrible encumbrance, especially when one is married. Fashion is merely a form of ugliness, unbearable, that we compelled to alter every 6 months. An acquaintance that begins with a compliment is sure to develop into a real friendship. It starts in the right manner. Laughter is not all a bad beginning of a friendship, and it is far from best of ending for one. I always like to know everything about a new friends and nothing about my old ones. Formal courtesies will strain a close friendship. Children begin loving their parents after a time. They judge them. Rarely, if ever, do they forgive them. This grey, monstrous London of ours, with its myriads of people, its sordid sinners and splendid sins. I don't like Switzerland. It has produced nothing but theologians and waiters. There is this to be said in favour of the deposit, that he, being an individual, may culture, while the mob, being a monster, has none. History never repeats itself. Historians repeat each other. The one duty we all owe to history is to rewrite it, and the reason we all like to think so well of the others is that we are all afraid of ourselves. The basis of optimism is the sheer terror. Laughter is the primeval attitude towards life, a mode of approach that survives only in the artists and criminals. Do nothing at all is the most difficult thing in the world, the most difficult and the most intellectual. The aim of life is the self-development to realize one's nature perfectly. That is what each of us is here for. One can live for years, sometimes without living at all. Then all life comes crowding into one single hour. One can have in life but one great experience at best, and the secret of life is to reproduce that experience as often as possible. Don't tell me that you have exhausted life when a man says that one knows that life has exhausted him. To become the spectator of one's own life is to escape the suffering of life. Life cheats us with a shadow. We ask it for pleasure. It gives it to us. With bitterness and disappointment in its train, literature always anticipates life. It does not copy it, but molds it to its purpose. The 9th century, as we know it, is largely an invitation of the Balzac, a hate vulgar realism in literature. The man who could call the spade a spade should be compelled to use one. Are there not books that can make us live more in one single hour than life can make us live in a score of shameful years? To introduce real people into a novel or play is a sign of unimaginative mind, a coarse, untutored observation, an entire absence of style. The people that the world calls immoral books are books that show the world in its own shame. No one survives being overestimated, nor is there any surer way of destroying an author's reputation than to glorify him without judgment and to praise him without act. All love is tragedy. Misunderstanding is the bias of love. Those who are faithful know only the trivial side of love. It is the faithless who know love's tragedies. Faithfulness is the emotional life. What consistencies it is to the life of the intellectual, simply of the confession of failure. Lust makes one love all that one loathes. It is difficult not to be unjust to what one loves. One should always be in love. That is the reason one should never marry. The proper basis for marriage is the mutual misunderstanding. Married life is merely a habit, a bad habit. How marriage ruins a man. It's as demoralizing as cigarettes and far more expensive. The happiness of married men depends on the people he has not married. The one charm of marriage is that it makes a life of deception absolutely necessary for both parties. The world has grown so suspicious of anything that looks like a happy married life. It's most dangerous nowadays for a husband to pay attention to his wife in public. It always makes people think he beats her when they are alone. Nowadays, everybody is jealous of everyone else, except, of course, a husband and wife. 20 years of romance make a woman look like a ruin, but 20 years of marriage make her something like a public building. Girls never marry the men they flirt with. Girls don't think it right. Men marry because they are tired. Women because they are curious. Both are disappointed. Men know life too early. Women know life too late. That is the difference between men and women. The only way a woman can ever reform a man is by boring him so completely that he loses all possible interest in life. When a man has once loved a woman, he will do anything for her except to continue to love her. A man can be happy with a woman as long as he does not love her. Men always want to be a woman's first love. That is their clumsy vanity. Women have more subtle instincts about things, what they like to be as a man's last romance. There is only one real tragedy in a woman's life, the fact that the past is always her lover and the future invariably her husband. Between men and women there is no friendship possible. There is passion, anonymity, worship, love, but no friendship. One woman have a wonderful instinct about things. They can discover everything except the obvious. One could never trust a woman who tells one her real age, a woman who would tell one that would tell one anything. It is only very ugly or a very beautiful woman who ever hide their faces. If a woman wants to hold a man, she has merely to appeal to what is worst in him. I never travel without my diary. One should always have something sensational to read on the train. There are many things that we should throw away if we are not afraid that others might pick them up. Why is it that one runs to one's ruin? Why is that destruction such a fascination? One needs the misfortunes to live happily. To live in happiness, you must know some unhappiness in life. The happy people of the world have their value, but the only negative value of foils they throw up and emphasize the beauty and fascination of unhappy. What fire does not destroy, it hardens. Suffering and community of suffering makes people kind, while to propose to be better than a man is a piece of insufficient cant. To have become deeper man is to the privilege of those who have suffered. There is no truth comparable to sorrow. There are no times when sorrow seems to me to be the only truth. All excess, as well as renunciation, brings its own punishment. Nothing succeeds like excess. Pure modernity of form is always somewhat vulgarizing. Nothing is so dangerous as being modern. One is apt to grow old-fashioned quite suddenly. The value of the telephone is the value of that two people have to say. Only one thing remains. Infinitely fascinating to me is the mystery of moods. To be the master of moods is exquisite to be mastered by them more exquisite still. You people who go in for being consistent have just as many moods as the others have. The only difference is that moods are rather meaningless. There must be no mood which one cannot sympathize, no dead mode of life that one cannot alive. Morality is simply the attitude we adopt towards people whom we personally dislike. There is no such thing as morality, for there is no general rule of spiritual health. It is all personal, individual. Modern morality consists in accepting the standard of one's age. I consider that for any man of culture to accept the standard of his age is a form of the grossest immortality. Manners are of more importance than morals. The moral is too obvious. I never came across anyone whom the moral sense was dominant, who was not heartless, cruel, vindictive, log stupid, and entirely lacking in the smallest sense of humanity. Moral people, as they are termed, are simple beasts. Music is the art which most completely realizes the artistic idea and the condition to which all the other arts are constantly aspiring. Music creates for one past of which one has been ignorant and fills one with a sense of sorrows that have been hidden of one's tears. If one plays good music, people don't listen, and if one plays bad music, people don't talk. I like Wagner's music better than anybody's. It is so loud that one can talk the whole time without people hearing what one says. Musical people are so absurdly unreasonable. They always want to be perfectly dumb at the very moment when one is longing to be absolutely deaf. The things of nature do not really belong to us. We should leave them to our children as we receive them. In nature there is, for me at any rate, a healing power. We look at nature too much and live with her too little. If nature had been comfortable, mankind would never have invented architecture. Nature, which makes nothing durable, always repeats itself, so that nothing which it makes may be lost. Nature is always behind the age. Whenever we have returned to life and nature, our life has always become vulgar, common, and uninteresting. There are only two kinds of people who are really fascinating: people who know absolutely everything, and people who know absolutely nothing. Of course I plagiarize. It is the privilege of the appreciative man. It is only the unimaginative who invent. The true artist is known by the use of the makes of which he anxes, and he anxes on everything. Every word in a play and musical, as well as an intellectual value, and most be made expressive of a certain emotion. I never write plays for anyone. I write plays to assume myself. If people want to act in them, I sometimes allow them to do so. There are two ways of disliking plays. One is to dislike them, the other is to like earnest. Pleasures is nature's test, her sign of approval. When a man is happy, he is in harmony with himself and his environment. No civilized man ever regrets pleasure, and no uncivilized man ever knows what a pleasure is. I adore simply pleasures that are last refuge of a complex. A cigarette is a perfect type of perfect pleasure. It is exquisite and it leaves one unsatisfied. What more can one want? I don't regret for a single moment having lived for pleasure. I did it to the full, as one should do everything that one does to the full. There was no pleasure I did not experience. I like persons better than principles. I like persons with no principles better than anything else in the world. I don't like principles. I prefer prejudices. It is personalities, not principles, that move the age. I wonder who it is that was defined man as a rational animal. It was the most premature definition ever given. Man is many things, but he is not rational. One is tempted to define man as a rational animal who always loses his temper when he is called upon to act in accordance with the dictates of reason, it would be unfair to accept other people to be remarkable as oneself. Only dull people are brilliant at breakfast.